will be going over with you all is called Up and Running with Bootstrap, and basically we'll just be covering the key pieces of Bootstrap that I believe are good to wrap your head around and get started with the framework fairly quickly. All the opinions on what you might need to get up and running are my own, which I think is important. Other people may certainly have different ideas. Yeah, so again, my name is Bess. I'm currently a JavaScript engineer at Articulate, though I was at Pinto and I did really enjoy my time there, so I'm really glad to be back helping Ralph out and sharing my information that I have gathered on Bootstrap with you all. So, why I think this talk might be helpful is I think the docs can be a little bit overwhelming when you just crack open Bootstrap online and take a look at what it offers. So I find it personally easier to conceptualize what Bootstrap does by looking at examples, and so that's what I'm going to try to focus on with a lot of my code, is to show you some examples so that you all can wrap your head around what's actually going on. So the first question I had in mind when I first saw Bootstrap or heard about it is, why would I use it? Makes sense, right? In general, it eases common, painful, and repetitive tasks often associated with building websites, and I'm sure we all have those. So if you're looking for a quicker, easier, more uniform way to build and set up a site, then Bootstrap might be a good way to go. So it obviously helps with a few things, but what does it actually help with? These are the things that I find can help me out when I'm using Bootstrap. So this is definitely not an all-inclusive list, but here are a few of the items. It helps with responsive setup and utilities related to responsiveness. It can help you set up grid layouts. It normalizes styles across browsers. It includes typography and common HTML styling, so things look pretty good out of the box. It allows for component building, such as drop-downs, navigation, glyphicons, and pagination. And there is a variety of jQuery plugins for a variety of UI interactions, such as modals, tooltips, and carousels. A good thing to keep in mind when considering all of these is that all of them are in fact optional. You can download a custom build of the pieces you might want to use. For example, if you don't want to use the JS plugins, no worries, you don't have to include those, or if you want to just include them for drop-downs, you can do that as well. So now we know what Bootstrap can actually help with. When is a good idea to use Bootstrap? I think this is an important question because frameworks can often be overused, as I'm sure we all know. So here are some places where I think it's a good idea to use or experiment with Bootstrap. First, when building a new site from scratch. Second, when exploring ideas or prototyping. Third, when trying to achieve baseline browser consistency. And four, when you're looking for a solid documentation from a framework. And that can be a pretty big one if you're really looking for a framework. There are, like I said, because the framework can be overused, I really do think it's important to think about where you want to apply Bootstrap and when considering it for a project, because Bootstrap is not a silver bullet. And it's also worth noting that if you have a need for older browser support, some of the Bootstrap features are not available in IE8 and below, like, of course. So I just wanted to note that you might want to look at the Getting Started guide on the website if you have more questions about that. So for the purposes of this talk, what will we be covering? The core components of Bootstrap that enable us to build faster, smarter, and funner websites. I recommend following along with the documentation if you want to. It's by no means a command. Just because that's the way I tend to like to learn, to read along as I go. So there's the link there if anyone wants to take a look. So first things first, now that we know why we might want to use it and what it kind of can offer, how do we set up? There are a lot of ways to integrate Bootstrap. I would definitely look to the options and use the one that best suits your needs. You can integrate it in with your current Sass or Less project, use Grunt, download the library itself, or use the CDN links for both the CSS and the JavaScript. I think if you're just getting set up and experimenting, the CDN links are fine to get going and get a preview of what Bootstrap offers. So I'm going to go over quickly a basic template that I think gets the gist of what Bootstrap offers right away and enables you to just start throwing things in there, as it were. I have used the CDN links in this sample template, which is different than the sample template on the Bootstrap website. So I think if you grab the basic template on the Bootstrap website, you still have to download the library files. Here you can just copy and paste this into a JS Fiddle or CodePen or save it as a new HTML file, and you should be able to run it. One thing worth noting is that there is this HTML5 doc type, and just some normal HTML5, UTF-8, and a couple other things I'll go over in a second, but we have the CDN CSS for Bootstrap, and then we actually have the body of the HTML itself. Really the only things here that are Bootstrap related are this div class of container, which I will mention in a second, and this hello world. So really there's not, oh, and then, sorry, there's a jQuery, which is necessary for the Bootstrap plugins, JavaScript plugins to run, and then the Bootstrap JavaScript itself. So if I was to run this demo, you don't see a whole lot, but you do see that the container is at least centered to the page. It's not bleeding to the left edge, and the header looks pretty good for just being a normal H1. And if you see this locally in your own files, then Bootstrap should be ready to go. All right, so before I delve into features, I think it's a good idea to review the core basics of what the framework sets up and the point of view it comes from. The first thing to know about Bootstrap is it's built mobile first. You don't need to add helper classes to override what would be considered desktop, quote-unquote, styles. Mobile first means just that. If you're not familiar with the term, it's just the default framework is built for mobile without needing further tweaks from the beginning. There is one thing you probably do want to add, though, which was in the previous template. You will want to add this meta tag in your HTML to ensure that proper mobile and grid rendering is available and does indeed happen. So, and that is in the docs. Again, because I find the docs a little bit overwhelming, I wanted to point out some of the sort of essential setup details. If you forget this part and your mobile experience isn't working, you could really end up wrecking your brain around why it might not be rendering correctly. So let's continue. More on what you get out of the box. The essentials are basically handled when it comes to CSS styling when you include Bootstrap. So this means that all the common styles for the HTML are normalized across the browsers. And Bootstrap just sets up a few small base styles, which is fairly minimal. One is that the background color is set to white, and the base font size is set to 14 pixels with a line height of 1.428. And this might not seem super important to you, but I do think it's a good idea to know what has been set before you override. And if you're using less, there are variables for all of these. There's a font family base, a font size base, and a line height base that you can override and use within your code. And I believe in terms of basic style setup, the only other style that gets set up is underlines on link hover. And these sort of common setup styles can be found within scaffolding.less. So, on to the more fun things. Bootstrap is responsive by default, which means it will respond to various browser sizes and viewports. The only thing you want to add to ensure that the styles cooperate as you expect is this container class, which we had seen in our previous template. And the container class sets a width that is going to be based on your current viewport at various different sizes. And if you want your container to be full width, the class is container-fluid. But this is almost always the first element that you put a style on. And then you continue downward with your other Bootstrap classes and your normal HTML. So now we are on to grids, and that's where the fun really starts. It's also where the complications, the complicated code or classes usually start as well. There are a couple things to keep in mind when setting up grids. I'm just going to restate myself a little. Obviously, you want the class of container, but the first actual rules of the columns and grids themselves is you want a div class. It could actually, I guess, be any element, but typically it would be a div, excuse me, with a class of row. And that just defines the row that the columns are going to live in and that they will span the full width of the container. And then within that row, you want to set your column. And the main probably rule, and the one to keep in mind, is that all columns must equal 12 if they want to expand to the full width of the row. So in the case of this column, it is set to fill the full width of the row. You might be wondering what that prefix is before that 12. And those are different column sizes you can specify, or sorry, different viewport sizes you can specify based on the size. So there are 4, I believe. There's column extra small, column small, column medium, and column large. So all of these are different column sizes that get applied at those various viewports, which are set in the documentation. You can see why this is kind of tricky. But if you look at the documentation for grids, I have the link here below. It outlines the sizes that these would be set at. So if we run this code, we can see, as I mentioned, I have this row, and it's taking up the columns are taking up the full width of the row, so it's wrapping in the space. And then we have below that another row with another column, and this column is set to 8. So it's going to span 8. And then another one which spans 4. So therefore it takes up the whole row as it equals 12. And that is why it lays itself out so nicely when we run the demo. Yes, so you might be wondering what's the benefit of using various sizes, and how do they actually get figured out, and what are the breakpoint sizes. This slide is just to give you a little more information on what these targeted sizes correspond to in terms of the column prefix. Basically, on those extra small sizes, since this is a mobile-first framework, there's no media query, and this is the default layout. In this case, the width is just going to be auto. It's going to try to fit however much it can into the column. For small devices, that'll be, so you'd use the SM prefix. That's for 768, medium 992, and large 1200. The first breakpoint in which the columns can stack horizontally and vertically are in the medium style. So if you want your columns to be all in line next to each other, but then stack horizontally at smaller screen sizes, then you'll want to just target the medium size. So if I run this in the demo, since the viewport is less than 992, and I run this, you can see that these columns are now stacked, and this is the same code as I was showing before, but instead of the small prefix, we have the medium prefix. So really, you have a lot of options for the ways that your columns get set up in the way that they're aligned. And also, you have the awesome option to have your own column party, where columns can have combined classes that result in various column layouts at different sizes. Since this demo is kind of constrained to a certain size at this point, I set up a code pen which kind of easily shows what can happen when you combine these columns. For example, I'll just talk through this kind of quickly, but we have our container and our row, and within that we have our column set up. The first column, at the extra small size, it will be spanning 12, which is the full length. At the small viewport size, we'll be spanning 6, and the medium 8. So at each viewport, this will take up a different amount of the row. For the second column setup, extra small will be 6, and since the one that's above it is 12, this would be on the next line. But because the mediums are 8 and 4 equaling 12, hopefully this isn't blowing your mind, the medium size will indeed take up the full row. So if we go here and take a look, my screen is too big. It actually does resize. So that's 8 and 4. So they're taking up the full row. I had just have a little styling here to show you the columns. And then if I try to get bigger, it should. Let's see. Yeah, you can see that that these change accordingly. That well, this one is creeping up around this one, but they are all shifting at various sizes for the viewport, so you can quite easily change the order of the layouts at various viewpoints just by adjusting these columns. And like I said, this might, I think I've said this, this might be the most complicated part of Bootstrap in terms of that you add and have to sort of think about and think through. But once you get started, I think you'll find that it's quite easily to conceptualize how to set up your grids. There is one thing that's new to Bootstrap, I think last month, that I thought I might mention, which you do have the ability to clear rows. And you have the ability to clear rows at certain sizes. So in the second, or I guess this is, yeah, the second row, we have some normal columns set up in the extra small size. We have 6 and 6. So that will be 12. And if we want to make sure we clear that column, we can quite easily put this class that says visible extra small block with the clear fix class, which is a Bootstrap class. And this will clear the row only when the extra small is visible. So that's really a handy way to clear rows at certain sizes. So in the case of the small, this row is not cleared. We have 4, 4, and 4, so these 3 will all be in line. So that's a lot of fanciness for the price of some classes. You might think, holy, oh my gosh, that's a lot of, that's divitis. And you might be right, but I think that grids do require a lot of CSS in terms of getting the layouts working without JavaScript. So that might be something about you want to consider when you're thinking about Bootstrap, if this makes you nervous. For me, it's okay. It's a wrapper div. It's setting up layout, and the viewports are being targeted specifically as such, and I find that it's sort of self-documenting and easier than trying to do something another way. One more thing on grids is you can nest grids. This looks complicated, but it's indeed very handy. So we can have our own column in a row, and within that, the column itself is 9. It's a span of 9, so it's not even going the full length of the row, which would be 12. But within that column, we have another row, and that row is set to 12. So if we run this code, we can see that the parent row, that would be the full length, has a child column, but it's only set to 9. But even though it's only set to 9, the children can be set to 12, which will take up the whole length of the parent. So you can nest these grids quite easily, even if their parents aren't taking up the full space of the row that they are in. And yeah, hopefully that is helpful if you've ever run across layout issues. All right. Hopefully that grid stuff didn't want to make your head explode, because now we're going to talk about HTML, which hopefully is a little more simple. So Bootstrap does offer way more than just grid loveliness. It helps support a vast array of HTML styles that are common and often hard to pull off cross-browser. So here I have my container, I have my row, I have my 8-span column, and in it I just have a header, a paragraph, an unordered list. Pretty simple. And my second column, again, they're totaling 12. I'm just sort of going to repeat myself a little bit. And we have a header, an image, and then we have a class of image, thumbnail, and image responsive. And these are just some helper classes Bootstrap offers that you can look into. And this just gives a nice thumbnail border around the image, and this sets the image to be responsive. We have a paragraph with the class of lead, or lead, and but it's lead. And this sets the font size to make it a little bit more of a lead or intro paragraph. And then we have a button with this BTN and BTN primary style. This is another set of Bootstrap classes that kind of sets up your HTML to look pretty fantastic. So I run the demo. Looks pretty good. Keep in mind that I have not applied any CSS at this point. This is all Bootstrap. So our header, our paragraph, our unordered list, our other row, our awesome cat image has this little rounded thumbnail action, and it's responsive. This image is much bigger in real life. And then we have our lead and button. So we've just set up our first semi-Bootstrap site just using some simple rows, columns, normal HTML, and a couple of helper classes along the way. Make sure you, well, you don't have to, but if you look at the documentation, you can see more examples of the type of HTML helper classes that are available to you. So, other than just normal HTML and what you might expect from Bootstrap, I wanted to explicitly mention forms, because I think, as we all know, normalizing forms are pretty difficult and notorious. And Bootstrap offers a lot of different ways to style a variety of form elements and layouts. And it's really quite easy. I think the first thing I want to mention is you want to make sure you build your form as you normally would, which would be a form tag, associating labels with inputs and all that good old semantic stuff. And so really with Bootstrap, you're just putting in extra classes. So the first thing you want to do if you want to lay it out in a Bootstrap style is you can use this class form group, which just sets up some spacing in between the elements so everything's aligned well. So we have a form group class, we have our label and our input. In this class of form control, all it really does is set this input to be 100% width of its parent form group. Then we have a second form group, same thing. A third form group with a file input and this help block text on some help text, which helps align help text. Then we have a checkbox and a submit button with another class of button, and this is a separate button style, the default button style. So if we run this, it looks pretty good, right? Here's your form, the labels and inputs that are associated, everything works pretty well. It's accessible. You can make it more accessible, I'm sure. We have a file chooser. Everything works. Boom, the button looks great. And this is just one way to lay out the forms, right? This is maybe what you would consider the standard way to lay out forms. Bootstrap also offers classes for inline forms, different sizes of the inputs, validation states, and disabled inputs, sort of the things you know and love about forms. Again, even though we're adding quite a few classes, make sure you keep your forms valid and built well. Enough on the HTML. Let's talk about components, or what you might consider widgets. And these are things you would build to solve commonplace hassles when building a website. One thing Bootstrap does really well, and one thing I've used quite a bit, is glyphicons. And they are icons built from a font that I believe are open source, at least they were offered for free to Bootstrap. But they're built from a font so that they resize gracefully, and they can be used inline with any text element, an HTML element that's inline. and look fantastic, I might add. So again, contain a row and a column. And then we have our header. Let's say we wanted to put an icon before this header. It's quite easy. We just want to insert a span or another inline element. Use a class of glyphicon, which is an indication to obviously use the glyphicon, and then the second class here is the icon itself to use. So here we're using the search icon. The second paragraph, or I guess the first paragraph, is will I ever find my phone? And I wanted to find a nice phone icon, so I did the same sort of setup with the span. I'm using this phone icon, and then in the second paragraph here, we have a button with a bunch of button classes. Button, button default, button large. So here you can see like Bootstrap just offers a ton of different ways to get things sized and set up for you out of the box. But then within that button, we have our glyphicon with an alternate phone. So let's see what happens when we run this demo. That looks pretty good, I have to say. Look at that glyphicon. Here's my search glyphicon, my text, my paragraph, my other glyphicon, and then within this button here, another. You can sort of think of glyphicons as unsemantic images, or something where you wouldn't actually, I guess the main takeaway is you don't want to add anything else to this span, right? You don't want to give it any more classes. It's just supposed to be displaying some visual text. It's a font in this case, but it's a visual helper for the associated text. So when you're using glyphicons, they should be used on their own within an inline element, and you do want to make sure there's a little space here, or it can just bump up against the edge of the text. But it's very helpful. It resizes. There's a lot of different icons to choose from, and I have a lot of fun with glyphicons. It's like your own personal emoticon set for building websites. So next we have drop-downs. This is another commonplace component, and I wanted to bring this one up too because it does require the JavaScript plugin. I'm sure, as you might know, you can probably pull up drop-down CSS, which I think Chapin will be covering. But in the case of Bootstrap, it does require JavaScript. So how do you set up your drop-downs? It's pretty easy. There is a container class around this. I just turned it off, the visualization of it. I turned it off. Just so that you can see a little more of the code here. So we have our row with our column. You want to wrap your whole drop-down in a div class of drop-down. You want to figure out which element you want to use for your target to open the drop-down. You can use pretty much anything you want. In the case of this first one, I'm using a button. Again, with my normal awesome classes and an additional class of the drop-down toggle. I think that the main thing to keep in mind when you're adding the drop-down is the class doesn't matter so much as the data toggle attribute. Since this is JavaScript, the JavaScript is is looking for, when it instantiates, it's looking for what it's going to open. And so drop-down, the data toggle attribute is what actually gets used to get the drop-down working. So you'll want to put the data toggle drop-down to associate the button with a drop-down that should be opened. And in the case of this, the drop-down we are opening is this drop-down menu. Excuse me. This attribute is for accessibility, and so it's quite easy. All you really need is a drop-down class wrapping your drop-down, an element which will trigger the drop-down with the data toggle drop-down, and then the associated drop-down text element, I mean. And in the second column, we have another div class of drop-down, but instead of a button toggle, we have an anchor toggle. Pretty fun. So we open this up, we run it, and we have, boom, this drop-down triggered by a button and another drop-down triggered by an anchor. Pretty easy peasy. I wanted to note too, I put in this caret, which is another Bootstrap helper. It's not a glyphicon, it's an actual caret that you obviously can associate as part of Bootstrap as well. So that's how you would set up your drop-downs. So you got your glyphicons, you got your drop-downs, and then you realize you need a nav. So a simple unordered list just won't do. Bootstrap offers a ton of different navigation styling options. And luckily for everyone, it's just using, you can use your typical UL. It just styles that up nice and neat. So I just have some text in a row, and then in my second row, I have a column with a nav UL. And the only thing you need to indicate to Bootstrap that you want it to be a nav is the nav class. And then the nav style you might want to use. In the case of this first one, we're using pill style, which is shaped like a pill. And the second one we're using down here in the second column is a tab style navigation. Again, there's an attribute for ARIA here. If you're unfamiliar with ARIA, Bootstrap documentations do go over some of this in a little bit of depth, and it's basically for accessibility. So we run this, we have some awesome looking tabs, or navs, nav tabs. Here's our pill ones, and here are our panel-y tab ones. You might be thinking, oh, that's awesome, I want to show my panels. You might be thinking ahead. And that is another JavaScript component. But for the case, if you just wanted a styling that looked like this, and you wanted to write your own JavaScript, or you want to try to trigger these open with CSS, you could easily do that too. This is just for the styling. So navs, pretty rad. Here's another component that I find handy that's a relatively simple one, panels. Panels, you can just think of it as boxes with borders around them, and some little stylistic help along the way. I find panels really helpful for prototyping a website. So if you're using Bootstrap, if you just want to get an idea out there, you want to try things out, you want to move things around, a panel can be a really good idea to delineate some of your content, especially in different columns. So here we have a container in a row, a column to 12, and a panel. So the panel is the first class you want to use, and then a styling class. In this case, it's just the default panel. I believe this might be optional as well, so this probably doesn't have to be here, but I like to include it because it's a pretty common thing to add. And then a panel body, which is just the content of the body. In the second row, I have another column, and in that I have a panel with also a panel heading, just a separate div, and a panel title, and this just gives some extra styling look to the panel title, obviously. And then another panel body, and the last one is just another simple panel. So when I run this, it doesn't look all that exciting, but you have some delineated content set up, everything's in the columns correctly, you have your title, you could also have a footer, which I didn't include here. But again, this is just a really nice component you can use, and then you can override with your own styles later if you want to or need to. So obviously, I've covered only a few of these components, and that's just the beginning. There are all different types of components you can use. The other components include paginations, that's not really a word, pagination, wells, thumbnails, and common header styles such as Jumbotron. You may have seen that one. It's like a giant jumbo header, which I show on a later slide. You might want to take some time and read through those components if you're wondering what might be helpful for you in your project. Okay, so now that we've talked through responsive, setting up grids, what the basic HTML looks like, and some of the components you can use, I just wanted to chat about JavaScript. Again, these are jQuery plugins, and that bears repeating just because if you don't include jQuery, you might be unpleasantly surprised. And most of these JavaScript components are or plugins rather, are to help you ease the UI pain. So let's talk about some UI pain. Modals. I'm sure you've all wallowed through modals at some point, launching absolutely positioned divs, trying to mask the background, getting everything working cross-browser. These can be quite a pain. and Bootstrap does give us quite a lot with the Modal.js plugin. In Bootstrap's words, modals are streamlined but flexible dialog prompts with the minimum required functionality and smart defaults. And I would definitely agree with that. I'm doing a semi-complicated modal demo just to get your head wrapped around what's actually, what the modal plugin can pull off. Don't be too intimidated though. I mean, maybe you weren't, but it'll be okay because it's mostly just a couple classes here and there. So in the case of the modal that I want to demonstrate, I want to trigger a modal when a button is clicked. You could have the modal if you wanted to just show up on page load, but I want to trigger it. So I'm going to set up a button. I've hidden the container and the rows and stuff for this demo. I've set up a button that has some styles on it. And the key thing I want to make sure I add is the data toggle modal. So this is what tells the JavaScript when this button gets toggled, I'm going to run the modal. I think as Dave mentioned, this is way smarter that the JavaScript is looking at a data attribute and trying to redraw than doing in the jQuery like inline by looking at hidden classes. So I definitely enjoy. I won't get into too much JavaScript talk, but it's good practice that this is on the data attribute. I think it's clearer as you read this that this is associated with JavaScript and not just for the CSS. So yes, you set up your data toggle and tell it to be a modal, and then you have a target. And so the target is the ID of your modal to launch. This is similar to an href, an anchor. So the second, we have the modal itself, which will be hidden by default. We give that class a modal, and the second class here is pretty fancy because it's the CSS transition that the JavaScript runs. I believe it's still run through the transitions.js Bootstrap helper. It's not just a straight up CSS transition, but I think the JavaScript just aids in the transition and the ending of it and everything. Then we have the ID of modal, which corresponds to the button. The rest of these attributes are for accessibility. So those are optional, but I recommend having them, and they are mentioned in the documentation. Next, we have some wrapper classes, and this just sets up the positioning, the modal dialog, and the modal content, which sets up the styling. And then we have some optional modal classes. We have a header, and within the header, we have another button that has a close. And so we have a data dismiss attribute similar to the toggle, and this will automatically dismiss the modal when clicked. We also have some screen reader only text, which is good for accessibility, and a title, and then we have modal body. And in the modal body, you can see we have a row again and columns. And this is just to sort of point out that even though we're in a modal, we can still use Bootstrap for anything else we want to. So no worries there. And kind of nice that you can pull that all off without a lot of hassle. And then we have a modal footer that can close this. Again, data dismiss is set up, and we have some styles on the button. So that's kind of a lot. I've been talking a lot. So let's see, and maybe we've already run this. I would have if I was listening. But so we have a modal, or not yet. We have this button which will launch the modal. I click it, boom, nice. It fades in as we instructed it to. We have our title, we have our close, we have our columns that are in a row, and we have our additional buttons. And this closes on data dismiss here or data dismiss here. It's really quite handy. You just have to sort of know and look at the docs to make sure you include the correct data toggling or attributes, rather, the data attributes for the modal, and you would be pretty much good to go. We've initialized this modal through HTML just by associating these data toggle attributes, but you could also instantiate and set up your modals in your JavaScript files themselves, and there are a ton of options you can pass into the modal. I won't really go into all of them, obviously, but if you are having modal problems, I don't know why that sounds funny to me, or you're just wanting to play around, definitely look that up. So modals, simple, flexible, smart, fun. Okay, affix. Another fun thing you can do is have an affixed element that follows your scrolling. You've probably often seen this in sites, either with headers being affixed or sidebars. In the case of this demo, I'm going to affix a sidebar nav. So we have a container, and I'm using a Jumbotron, something I mentioned earlier, which is sort of a header area. So this is going to be like a standout sort of header. And then we have our row. And within that, we have a 9 and a 3 spanned row. We're going to have a nav in this first one. Again, we already talked about navs, and this is a nav stacked as opposed to a pillar tab nav. And this just stacks the nav on top of each other. And here's where the affix comes in. We have a data spy attribute. And this initializes the affix to be spied on. And then you can set more data attributes with top and bottom, all sorts of offsets for the affix to stick to. In this case, we want the affix to always stick up to the top at its offset top of 0, so it doesn't go beyond where we start. Then I just have some normal links or navigation here, and in the second row I have corresponding sections, right? So each anchor in this link corresponds by ID to each of these headers. So there's a lot of content there. But you run it, it's pretty sweet because, woo, it's affixing itself in this left-hand column here. And because I set up the target to be, corresponding to the ID, if I click this, it jumps down. So I would say this is probably the first functional, a fully functional Bootstrap demo where we're actually using something for a web page and almost like its total use. But affix can be very handy and something that I've used quite a bit. And this is just using straight HTML with a little bit of data spy fix. And things are looking pretty good. And again, because it's a JavaScript component, you can instantiate this in your JavaScript documents instead of the HTML. And there are quite a lot of options for this and different offsets, as I mentioned. So play with that. Tooltips. Lovely, lovely tooltips. Again, this might be something you would try to pull off in CSS, but if you have some really crazy tooltips with tons of options, this is a good bet. And this is also worth repeating, or I guess I didn't say it yet, but I will say it now. The tooltip, as opposed to other JavaScript plugins, needs to be instantiated in JavaScript. That is for performance reasons. You could have like hundreds of tooltips, and if all of those try to get instantiated on page load, well, that wouldn't be good. So in the case of this, I'm instantiating the button class with tooltip. Because it's a jQuery plugin, obviously I can run that off of the jQuery dollar here, and obviously I would not run the script in the middle of the page. Button. So we have a container, a row, full spanned column, a header and a paragraph, and a button. And this is where I want the tooltip. So I'm going to have a data toggle tooltip, again with the data attribute. You're saying when this gets clicked, basically, make sure the tooltip gets run. You can choose your placement for the tooltip and the title, and this is nice because this is also fully accessible. So even people that don't have JavaScript enabled, or if for some reason someone's screen reader for accessibility didn't have JavaScript enabled, the title would still have semantic meaning. So this tells the tooltip to place the tooltip at the top and use this text. Pretty fancy. So when I run this, you can see the tooltip submitting is what do I want to do? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. Oh yeah, it's usually fun. That tooltip was helpful. I crack myself up. Okay. So tooltips have a ton of options as well. So look into them if you need to use them. They're quite easy to set up, but do remember that you need to instantiate those in your JavaScript. Just a couple more things to cover here. Next we have accordions. It's more than just sweet jams, you know. Since we already talked about panels, I thought it would be good to sort of show an example where we highlight it and extend what we might be able to do with the panel. So basically an accordion is just a panel that opens and closes. I'm sure we've all seen those from time to time. We have a container class. We have a class of panel group, which just sets up the panel. And then the groupings of the panels, if there's multiples. We have a div class of panel heading, and then a title within that panel. The key here is the data toggle collapse again. So we're telling, basically, JavaScript is associating the toggling of this anchor with collapsing the accordion. We're setting the parent here of the accordion, which you want to make sure you have a reference to, and this is just so the JavaScript keeps track of what its parent is. You could have multiple panel groups, so part of this is performance related, I believe, but it's just good to know. So you have your toggle collapse, which is setting up the target. And the href, much like an anchor before, is that is what sets up the target. It's a collapse 1. So collapse 1 in this case is this first div. And in that div, we have a panel body. This might seem really complex, but once I run the demo, hopefully it will make a little more sense. We have a collapsed item here, our collapsed toggle, and it's open by default. And then when we click it, it closes. It's pretty nice, right? And yeah, all you really want to make sure you do is set up your panel classes. You associate a toggle, which is set to collapse, and then you reference which item you want to collapse when clicked. If you set the collapse class of that item to in, it starts with that one open, which is pretty nice. So hopefully this accordion makes somewhat sense. I think this might not be as widely used as some of the other JavaScript components here, but I do think this is a nice extension of using panels. So if you're already using a panel and you're like, man, I wish that panel would just open and close, well, easy. All you have to do is add a couple data attributes, make sure you have your collapse classes set up, and you're good to go. All right, this is my last JavaScript component, the lovely carousel. Carousels, you might have strong opinions on them, but if you want to or need to build one, you can quite easily do that with Bootstrap. Much like the previous example, there are quite a lot of classes being thrown around here, but there's only a few things you really need to pay attention to. One is that your wrapping div needs to have an ID. This is to associate, for the JavaScript to be able to associate which carousel is being. So when you click on various points in the carousel, it's in reference to the current carousel. You could have your arrows for the carousel outside of this div, for example, and you want it to still work. So you want to make sure you give that carousel an ID, and then you give your carousel a class of carousel, and this is the transition you would want for your carousel. The CSS transition, you would want slide. And data ride carousel is, this is an attribute so that it will start animating on page load, so it's optional. So with every carousel comes indicators, usually. So we just have a class of carousel indicators for this ordered list, and the target that these carousel indicators are tied to are the ID of the parent, and then a data slide to, which is when you click on this guy, which data do you want to slide to? So this would be the first, it's a zero-based index, the first slide. And this is set to active by default, just because we know that it's going to start with this one because of data ride carousel. And then we set up the items themselves. So we have a carousel inner class and an item class. The first one is active, so that's why we have those first active classes associated. We have an image. I'm using the responsive image class, and a carousel caption, which is also optional. And then just another item. So this is only a 2-item carousel. And then we have some controls, and the controls just have a carousel control class with a left or a right. which I believe are just floaters, right? So left and right, in the case of Bootstrap, I think are just floating these. I don't think they're associated with the carousel, but I'd have to look that up because Bootstrap has a lot going on. And then we say data slide, go to the previous or next. So again, kind of a lot. I'll run this guy. Oh my gosh, so much coffee, so awesome. You can see that these are the previous and next arrows, and if I scroll down, these are the indicators. So if I click an indicator, there's my happy coffee. If I click these, it's working. It looks great. There's only 2, but you can see that I got a lot going on here. I got images that are responsive. I got these arrows that go previous and cycle through. See, I'm going back. It's infinite. And we have indicators and captions, all without a lick of JavaScript to write yourself when JavaScript is happening. So carousels are quite lovely and can be used when needed. And again, you can instantiate this yourself with JavaScript, and there are a ton of options you can use. I just used an example that was fairly straightforward, and I like to show the examples using the HTML because I think it's pretty powerful that you can get this set up without having to crack open a JavaScript file. All right, and of course there's more. So I just covered a couple of the JavaScript components. There's, for example, scroll spy for those fixed headers while scrolling. That's a little helper kind of for a fix. You might think it helps an element just stick up to the top. While you're scrolling, popovers, those are more like small overlays rather than tooltips. Alerts and tabs, as I mentioned before. You can check these out, play with them. There's a lot of examples on the Bootstrap site. And you put it all together, and what have you got? Fun features. I thought this was funny this morning, and now I'm laughing at myself because it's kind of ridiculous, but it's true. Bootstrap offers a lot of fun and a lot of features, hence a lot of fun features for you to play with, for you to experiment with. I would say, go crazy and, read the documentation and build things out as you go. That's how I learn. Maybe that's how you learn, maybe not. If you have a different technique, I want to hear about it. So there you have it, Bootstrap in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed the overview. And while a framework is never perfect and might not always fit the bill, I hope this presentation at least gave you some information to help you make some informed decisions and some motivation to experiment. Even if you're learning, let's say you're learning JavaScript. You might not want to pick up Bootstrap as a way to learn it, but at least you can play with it and get to know JavaScript a little better. And that's it. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thanks, Bess. Couple quick questions. I probably only have time for 1 or 2 here, but I see a few more in the chat, so if you don't mind staying a little later and just answering some of those questions. The first one, what is
Sure.
a regular download size for Bootstrap?
Well, I kind of mentioned this, but I know some folks might be a little turned off by the classes. There's quite a lot of classes, which can be a little overwhelming when you read the code, especially if you have your own classes mixed in with the Bootstrap classes. I find that it can be confusing to know what classes are Bootstrap and what are yours at a glance. So you might want to keep that in mind when building. The other thing is if you already have a legacy site, like something that's been around forever, and you try to just put Bootstrap on top of it to pretty some things up, you can end up with a pretty big headache because I'm sure, as you can imagine, a framework can't fix everything, right? So that's why I mentioned Bootstrap as being helpful when you are more likely starting out with a site, or you can scrap your CSS and have a baseline set up. So that would kind of be my first couple thoughts on that.
Second question, this will be the last question, then we'll take a quick break. Osimno asks on slide, he asked this question when you were on slide 25. I don't think it really matters though,
Okay.
but can you quickly cover what the area dash attribute do for the modal? I think he's just looking for an explanation of what the why ARIA attributes actually do.
Oh, so ARIA attributes are helpful for screen readers because they designate certain parts of the HTML as having semantic meaning. So when, like a screen reader is what helps people with assistive disabilities, usually blind folks, and they'll read the page, then they'll say, you are in a modal, it is open. And so those attributes are actually what tells the screen reader the state of the current item. And in some cases, if you saw the role attribute, that's just like the screen reader will say, you are in a menu, or this is a menu. I can't remember exactly what was on the modal, but it's basically just signifiers so that screen readers can help people figure out where they are in a page if they can't visualize where they are. Hopefully that's helpful. It can often help with SEO too, but that's the majority of reason of why it's used.